Good morning, fellow adventurers and my weary wanderers, and welcome to the next devlog for Daemon Change. This week's quest is a continuation of last week's quest, where I was trying to create enough of a combat system that I could successfully attack a target dummy. Everything was going well, in theory, until I encountered that week's big boss, an unknown logic error that just broke everything. Spoiler alert, I did manage to defeat the big boss, and now combat does work as intended, but the quest of making a combat system and a target dummy is still in progress. I need to complete a few more objectives before we can call this quest complete. And we'll get into that, of course, but I do want to talk a little bit more about that boss and how I ended up beating it. Now then, in programming, there's this idea that has to do with deleting data once it's used. You might call it flushing data or consuming data or any number of things, but the basic idea is that some data needs to stick around so it can be used multiple times, and other data needs to be deleted the moment it appears. My favorite practical example of this concept is the concept of a health bar and dealing damage to that health bar. So health is a kind of data that you want to keep around. If you have something that has 1,000 health points, you need to keep track of that number so you can add and subtract stuff from it as needed. This is the kind of data that you don't consume. However, on the other hand, dealing damage is something that you need to consume the second it's applied. You want damage to happen just one time and then disappear until it's called again later. If you don't do it that way, you don't consume your damage event, damage will get applied over and over and over and over again. And I love this example because it actually happened in the release version of Elden Ring. There was a specific section of the game where these doggos could run up and they could attack you, and their attacks weren't consumed on hit, which means that they would do their full damage every frame that their hitboxes overlapped yours. So players would just die immediately because these dogs could do hundreds of thousands of damage in just a few seconds. Zuli the Witch did a great video on this, and I'll leave a link to that down below. Now then, the big boss that I was fighting basically came down to this. I had created a system which could differentiate between players tapping a button versus a player holding a button. Whichever action a player did, a tap or a hold, I needed to take that data, use it, and then consume that input and throw it away. And I was doing that. The problem was just that the specific section of code that would consume the input was being used at completely random times. I don't know if maybe I had tried something or was working on something and then forgot to delete it, or if I copy pasted something from somewhere I shouldn't have, but button presses were being deleted immediately, during, or sometimes even minutes after they actually happened. It was super frustrating because the problem seemed random, and it took me a long time to realize it's because it literally was random. Once I figured it out, though, it was very easy to fix. There were some other problems that I needed to address that came up after things were working better. One example being what to do when the window for holding a button extends past the end of an animation, but most of that was pretty easy to fix as well. And the end result is this: the ability to run around, do combos, and attack things, which is a great segue into the remaining objectives I have for this particular quest. The point of making these systems, and the reason why I call them systems in the first place, is because they're made to be expanded. Right now, there are 3 attacks you can do, and they chain together in a specific order. You can tap or hold the attack button, and each of which causes you to do something different based on what the character was last doing. It's a system, though, because these attacks can be changed, swapped out, modified, and rearranged into any order at any time. What that means for me is that creating cool moves like a spinning, flippy, dippy twirl kick is super easy and kind of like making a Lego brick. Once it's been made, I can assemble it however I want. The last 2 objectives I have for this quest are, number 1, to add in a second attack button so that there are 2 different buttons the player can use in order to make combos and attack sequences of their choice, and number 2, to make a target dummy that can take damage and be destroyed. Now that the combat system actually works, adding in the second attack button and sending the damage information over to a different actor should be the easy part. Should in air quotes, of course. My guesstimation is that this quest will take either 1 or 2 more weeks, and then I can seal it with the quest complete stamp of approval. Now, originally I had intended on laying the groundwork for the first boss of the game once I had completed combat. Creating the first boss is the last piece of the puzzle and the last variable in terms of what I know I'm capable of. However, in the 4 months that this project has been going on, people have been giving me a lot of feedback, and it's feedback I've found very upsetting. This looks amazing. This is a great game so far. You're almost there. This is upsetting stuff to hear because as far as I'm concerned, this is still only the most rough of drafts. This is not final quality at all. And upon second consideration, I think it's time to go back over some of the stuff I've made and polish it up into something, we'll say, nicer. If so many of you are going to be so supportive, I want to give you something really nice to be supportive of. So get excited, and get especially excited if you're one of my adventurers on Patreon, because you'll be getting all the shinies before everyone else. And the combat build will be available to you guys specifically early next week. Stay tuned, because we're almost on to Phase 2 of Daemon Change. I'll see you in the next one.